We're making one of my favorite dishes, which is a lentil bruschetta with olive oil poached halibut, something we run at the restaurant occasionally, but it's perfect for the super hot weather. This is a antipasta dish, so it's an Italian-style appetizer. It can be served as a starter. It's really high in protein, so you could probably actually eat it as a light entree or even breakfast with a fried egg on top the next day. So we're going to start out with some lentils because those take the longest to cook. And the thing about lentils is they are not rice. You want to make sure there's plenty of water so that they don't turn out overcooked and mushy. So you would just take your lentils, and you can sort them two ways. You can either pour them into a strainer and sort of sort through them, and you're just looking for dirt clots or rocks or like little puckered, tight, hard lentils. So you can do it like that. At the restaurant, we do it like this because you can see a little bit better. And so we'll spread them out and kind of just pick through them. And you're probably not going to find anything, but if you've ever had a rock in your food, it's worth the extra effort. So once we do that, we'll rinse them, and we would like to rinse them in a bowl of water 3 times over. You could also just run them under the sink just to make sure all the dirt and debris is out. So we always kind of double down on things at the restaurant just so it's perfect. Then you're going to add them to your pot. And the ratio, you want about 2.5 to 3 times water to lentils. And then we'll fill this pot. You want it to be about 1.5 or 2 inches above the lentil level. And you're going to bring it up to a rapid simmer and then drop the temperature back down so that they don't overcook. And I have some washed carrots here. These are from the WSU Organic Farm. And all the farms around here are really great about working with the restaurants. Right now we get carrots from everybody, but just right now they happen to be coming from WSU. So just cut them up, leave them big. When I'm at home, I give the dogs the compostable scraps, not the onions, of course, but for now, it's nice if you have a little garbage container for composting later in your workstation. And just about a half an onion or a whole small onion into the pot. And a bay leaf or 2. And then we would fill this up with water and, like I said, bring it up to a rapid simmer and drop it back down. And these are going to cook in about 20 minutes. Sunrise lentils are a low tannin lentil, which means they have a more delicate seed coat, so they actually cook faster and absorb water more readily than like a Spanish Pardina lentil, a gray or a green lentil that you're used to seeing. Low tannin lentils also have a nice buttery taste because they have 0 or low tannin. Tannins are the thing in like walnuts or grape skins or like crab apples that give you that sort of astringent, dry feeling in your mouth. So with a 0 tannin lentil like the red sunrise, they're going to have a real buttery taste. Another legume that has 0 to low tannins would be garbanzo beans, and so that's also contributes to their sort of creamy, buttery mouthfeel. So normally we'd bring this up to temp first because they take the longest. The next thing we're going to do is get our fish going. So this fish is poached in olive oil. And if you were doing it at home, not very often, I think you could just use straight olive oil. At the restaurant, because we're poaching so much fish and constantly changing out the oil every 5 or 6 fillets, we mix it half grapeseed oil and half olive oil, which grapeseed is a good oil for high temp. So we're going to take our fish, which this is wild Alaskan halibut. And we're just going to salt and pepper. And I always salt from a bowl because salting from a shaker is really difficult to tell how much salt you're putting on. And then we'll do a little cracked pepper. This is just a fine sea salt, but you could use kosher, or if iodized is all you have, that's fine too. So once it's seasoned, we're just going to drop it in our oil. We want the oil to be about 180 degrees, so not too hot. Just take care when you're heating the oil. You don't want it to reach the scalding point or scorch the oil. So just drop your halibut in, and then you're going to set the timer for about 15 minutes. I wanted to show you guys how we do poached halibut at the restaurant. One, because it's really easy. Two, it makes the fish really super tender. But you know, I like this dish because you don't have to do this way. You could cook a piece of halibut on low heat in a saute pan, so as long as you're not getting any sort of a sear and it stays nice and soft and tender, it's going to work just fine. You could also use leftover fish if you had brought leftovers home from a restaurant and you had a piece of cold fish in the fridge. You could crumble that up into this dish. You could even use canned tuna. So it's a super versatile dish, but I just wanted to show you, one, how easy it is to poach halibut, and just kind of the way that I do it at the restaurant. So while that is going, we'll move on to chopping the vegetables for the bruschetta portion. And bruschetta is a cold sort of starter dish, so it would be great for a potluck. It's really good for this heat that we have right now. It's going to be really refreshing. It looks beautiful when it's tossed all together. So the other thing, if you have a steel at home, always make sure you straighten your knife blade before you get started. There's nothing more dangerous than a dull knife because you have to sort of work against the inefficiency of the blade, and you do kind of dumb things when you have a dull knife. So we always teach everyone at the restaurant to, number one, make sure your knife is always nice and sharp. Now this celery is organic, but it's not local. We don't have any celery available at the market just yet. And we're going to take out the heart and save it for later. We'll be using that as a garnish. And we're going to do about 1/8-inch dice on this celery. So upside down so it's more stable. 2016 was the year of the pulse. It was the International Year of the Pulse. I think it's probably always the year of the pulse in our area because we are the self-proclaimed lentil capital of the world. We export about 1 million pounds of lentils a year to places like Spain and France and Italy. They're also really nutritious, so they're high in folate, protein, iron. So between the halibut and the lentils, this is just a really nutritious dish. You also have the omega-3s coming from the olive oil, and we actually use Greek olive oil at Maialina restaurant, even though it's Italian, because my business partner, George, is Greek, but also we love Greek olive oil. So traditionally, we would be using Italian, but we like the Greek. So nice long sticks. And always tuck your fingers. They call it the claw to make sure that you don't cut the tips of your fingers. So this is going to provide a nice crunch in the dish because the halibut's real soft and the lentils will be soft as well. So this is a nice textural contrast. All right. Celery is one of the important things to buy organic if you can. It generally has fairly high pesticide residues, so whenever we can't get it locally, we always buy organic at the restaurant. So we'll set that aside. And next we're going to do the onion. This is a Walla Walla sweet onion, and like Zach mentioned, we're getting them from both Pokey Creek as well as Wilson Banner Ranch down in the valley. I read recently that someone in either New Zealand or Australia is developing a tearless onion that will still have all the onion flavor, but is going to be bred not to make you cry. So there's a sulfuric compound in onions that when it reacts with other molecules is extremely volatile, and it's a certain type of volatility that allows it to travel through the air pretty rapidly and affect your olfactory senses and eyes as well. That compound is also the reason why old onions that have been cut for a few days smell really bad. And so one of the things that I would recommend for this dish, if you are going to eat it right away, I really don't think it's a big problem. But if you intend on making enough to save, go ahead and rinse your onion, because it's going to rinse off that sulfuric compound that doesn't age very well. And lentils will hold cooked for a week or so in the fridge. So if you're going to keep it, make sure you rinse your onions. That's one of the tricks that we do at Sangria, the Peruvian restaurant. They use a ton of onion. And we have a fresh salad called salsa criolla. And so we always make sure we rinse the onions, even sometimes triple rinse them. And when you do that, the onion retains sort of a light sweetness, even though it's a raw onion. You don't get that sort of sulfury onion flavor. But since we're going to be eating ours just right away, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to rinse these and see if you guys can tell the difference when you eat it. I think once you have rinsed onions, you'll never go back. All right. That sulfuric compound that we were talking about is actually the thing that is poisonous to dogs and cats. So that's why we don't give dogs and cats anything from the allium family, because garlic has it as well. So that's one of the things that I don't feed to the pets when I'm home cooking. So let's check our halibut. We're going to be looking for an internal temperature of about 135. Got about 7 minutes on our timer, so that's good. We're about halfway there. Now, we would probably check our lentils, which again, cook quickly. And you don't need to pre-soak lentils because they do cook so quickly. So even the non-zero tannin lentils, like a green lentil or a Spanish lentil, you wouldn't need to soak those either. So these are lentils that were cooked exactly the way that I showed you guys a moment ago. So we'll add those. Then go ahead and throw in our onion. Throw in our celery. And a little bit of chili flake. Oregano. Elizabeth Taylor sells dried herbs at her stand, so she does a really lovely job with dried herbs in little packets. And then this is just fine sea salt and red wine vinegar. That's another thing. When you cook lentils, you get a more even cooking if you don't salt the cooking water, so salt them afterward. If you're going to use them plain, like say we made extra lentils and we wanted to use some in the bruschetta and save some left over for a salad or something like that, you can put the salt in the water when they're done cooking and sort of let them sit with the salt, and they'll absorb the salt just as they would if they had been cooked from start to finish with it. The salt molecule affects the seed hull, so it can speed it up, but it can also keep the seed hull more intact. So I prefer to cook it without salt just because it's more consistent. Okay, now we'll add our olive oil. One of the things I love about this dish is how simple it is. And I would recommend, if you're going to go through the trouble of cooking lentils, which isn't that much trouble, to just make extra, because you can throw them in soups, you could put them on salad, so you could use some in the bruschetta and then hold some over, and they're really lovely. I don't know if you guys have seen all the lentils available at the co-op that is offered by the P&W farmer cooperative around our area, but they have a really nice variety. So this is red sunrise. Another zero tannin lentil is called Shasta, which is a yellow lentil. And then they have Spanish Pardina lentils. They have a nice selection, so I would go check it out. And maybe do a little bit of research because they do cook slightly differently. So don't be afraid to Google it, or if you have a cookbook of a chef that you like, check in the index and see if they talk about lentils. Okay, set that aside. We've got about 4 minutes left on our fish. Just getting this to turn on. So we serve this with bread cooked in the oven at the restaurant, and you could serve it with any bread. So traditionally in Italy, bruschetta is served with garlic toasted bread. So you take a raw garlic clove and rub it on the bread with olive oil, toast it like that. But you can use any real type of bread that you like. So this was just bread done in the oven at Maialina. And the bread we use is actually the pizza dough. So normally you would take that pizza dough ball and you would open it up and toss it so it's nice and thin. But if you don't do that and you just take the pizza dough ball by itself and just lightly press down and throw it straight in the oven like that, it'll sort of rise up into this lovely poof of bread, and then it sort of falls flat back down after it cools. And our bread has a really nice sort of, almost like a sourdough taste to it because we do what's called a biga, which is a sort of form of starter, and it gives the bread a little bit more depth of flavor. Other things that have tannins are, other than grape skins, would be pomegranates or cranberries. Chocolate has tannins. Tea leaves do. So if you've ever brewed your tea too strong and you're like, that's because of the tannins. They're also found in tree bark. And the word tannin comes from the old German word tanna, which is the name for the oak tree. And they used to use the bark from that tree in tanning hides. So that's where the word comes from, is to tan hide, is from that tannin compound. Okay, so now we'll check our fish. And it's so tender, it's actually just falling apart, even though I'm using this fish spatula. So you can see how it's cooked all the way through, but it's just extremely tender. You can see how the flakes are separated, but it's not dry at all. If you are a fisherman and you break down whole trout or steelhead, that would be also awesome for this dish. And you could use the scraps, so you don't need to poach a whole fillet like I did here. You could just take the trim from that fish and poach those, or you could take the trim from that fish and cook it over low heat. So this is that's another reason why I love this dish, because you can almost use anything. You can use other types of lentils as well, but I like the low tannin buttery lentil for this just because all of the flavors are so delicate that I don't really feel like it needs that sort of astringent quality that would come from a regular lentil. So you would just take the fish and just lightly flake it. And this is pretty warm. My fiance always kids me because I touch extremely hot things and will just eat boiling soup right out of the pot. So I don't recommend flaking it as soon as you pull it out, but let it sit a bit and then go ahead and flake it while it's warm. That way you're not working against the flesh of the fish if it's tight and cold and you're smushing it to get it to flake. And it's just kind of too rough, and you don't need to you don't need to handle it so rough. So it's better to do it when it's warm. So this is just really beautiful, tender. And you'll know sometimes overcooked halibut almost has a chickeny texture, like a dry chicken texture, and this is the exact opposite of that. So there's our flaked halibut. And I have chilled. You'd want to chill that before you put it into the bruschetta, unless you're going to put it in the fridge and serve it later in the day or serve it the next day. So it's a lot more refreshing if it's nice and cold. And I like to taste for salt. Make sure your salt's nice and mixed together. And taste this mixture for seasoning. So make sure it has enough acid. Add more vinegar if you need to. If you like it a little bit more juicy, you can just up the vinegar and oil together. If you like sauce for mopping, as my business partner would say. And the reason I mix it and taste it first is so that you don't beat up the fish flakes once you put it in there and they stay sort of prominent in their texture and size in the mix. So let's go ahead and taste this. I think it needs a little more salt. Maybe a little bit more oregano and chili flake. How spicy do you guys like? Up, down, not too spicy, middle, up? Oh, okay, I won't make it too bad, but I'll maybe put a little bit extra. And the red flakes in there are a nice contrast as well. All right. So I think that tastes nice. I'm just going to go ahead and polish those off. The other thing about amending the olive oil with grapeseed oil is it's less expensive. So if you were going to do this a lot, which we do, we make that mixture partially for that reason as well, because we're changing it out so many times throughout the night. If you absolutely loved doing this, you can save the oil in the fridge and reuse it again the next day. If you just did a couple fillets, don't need to waste this nice oil, especially since you didn't bring it up to too high of a temperature. It's not going to have that sort of rancid, burnt oil flavor. All right, so in with the fish. And this fish is actually scrap. So we break down whole halibut and save the scrap for things like this. And so that way you guys can see that it really doesn't matter whether you use a big, beautiful, 1-inch thick fillet or if you use scrap. So here we're using scrap, so you can see how nice it is. And if your chunks are a little bit too big, you can break them up a bit so that you make sure, especially like today, since our portion sizes will be quite small, so we have more of them, make sure that every portion has a little bit of fish. But when we serve it in the restaurant, we serve it in one of these sort of mounding with fresh baked bread. So that's done. Lentils have been around for a really long time. They think they originated in the Mediterranean, and they found lentil artifacts as far back as 8,000 years. So humans have been eating lentils for quite some time. Let's see. Okay, so now back to our greens. I love celery greens because especially the inside ones, because the outer ones can tend to be sometimes tough as the plant sort of develops its natural defenses against sun and pests and things like that. It sort of fortifies itself and gets a little bit more tough. But this nice inner foliage is really tender and a little bit spicy and has a real nice strong celery flavor. So it's perfect for a garnish. And at the restaurant, one rule of thumb, we always try to garnish with relevant items to the dish. So not just throwing parsley on it for no reason. And that's one of the reasons why I love this for this dish is it has this real vibrant, pretty lime green color, but also there's celery in it, so it makes sense as a garnish on the dish. So you can just do a little rough chop. And we would serve it like this. And get a little bit of extra juice in there. As long as you sort of maintain the salt, vinegar, oil ratio, you could make this as dry or as wet as you wanted. And then we'll do a little bit of finishing salt. This is just a large flake salt. Little cracked pepper. Little drizzle of fresh olive oil makes a nice little glisten. And then we top it with the celery fronds there and serve it with a plate with your fresh bread. And that is your olive oil poached halibut bruschetta with local lentils.